Let's start in the NFC. I believe you've got 3 buckets here. You've got confident, hopeful, and longer shots. So since this is your baby, I'm going to let you kind of take this any way you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just mention, so I wrote a breakout article for every division, and there's still a couple left to go for the AFC this week, but we're going to talk about some of those players today. So a little bit of a spoiler there. But the idea was just who is probably the most likely breakout candidate for every team. Extremely early to do this. We got free agency, we got the draft. There's so many things that are going to happen before we really lock down on these guys. But it's an early look at some of these players. Some are a little more obvious, and that's why I've broken it down into these different buckets. Some are you're a little more confident in. Some guys are more long shots, but let's talk through them. First segment, we'll go over NFC, and then we'll talk about AFC a little later in the show. So to start off, the first bucket here is the guys that we are confident in, the guys who I truly believe that without a doubt, they're going to come out next season and have that breakout, take their game to the next level. And some of these guys you could argue have already broken out. You know, Tucker Kraft is a good example of a guy that if he didn't get hurt, as we've mentioned, he was leading the position in fantasy scoring through, the first 8 weeks or so. So he's a guy that you feel very confident in next season. He's going to come back and compete to be a top 5 fantasy tight end, maybe even better. Colston Loveland just finishing the season so hot. Of course, he had the draft capital behind him. We expected him to develop into being a really good player and a meaningful part of that offense. It really started to happen as the season went along, and I think he is going to be a key piece and a key playmaker for them. And a guy who, other than Trey McBride and Brock Bowers, you could kind of put him in that conversation after those guys as the next name that you could be looking at drafting in fantasy. We'll see where ADPs settle in, but he's somebody that I think has that kind of ceiling. And we saw that in the last month or so of the season with him having, multiple 100-yard games, him just getting a ton of targets. He's going to be a great player. Cam Scatteraboo, I've gone over the stats on him. We've talked about him even since the season ended here, that before he got hurt, he was getting touches at an incredible rate. Over his last 4 starts, averaged over 22 touches per game. If you look at the whole season, the only running back that had over 22 touches per game on average was Christian McCaffrey. And could that change? There's a serious injury that he's coming back from, of course, but the recovery timeline on that looks like it's about 4 to 6 months. All indications are he's expected to be back before training camp. And if he comes back into that same kind of role, he was producing at a high level, of course, with that kind of volume. How could you not? I think he could come back and be an RB2 with legitimate RB1 upside if he gets that kind of volume again. And then Ricky Pearsall is the guy that we've talked about who started the season so hot, a couple 100-yard games early, was producing really well, and then injuries just derailed his season. He's been in and out of the lineup, and unfortunately, we just really didn't see him get back to that same kind of level consistently the rest of the year. But you have to feel pretty good about him in that offense that we know Kyle Shanahan's going to continue to keep that offense moving. Brock Purdy, hopefully a little better injury luck next season, that he'll be out there for the full season and doesn't miss a ton of time. And then you look at the state of that receiving core. Brandon Ayuk, he's not coming back, so he's out of the picture. George Kittle suffering a serious Achilles injury. We don't know what his status is for next season. So I think Ricky Pearsall is going to be a much needed piece in that offense, and a guy that, if he can stay healthy, is really going to come on for fantasy. And I'll stop there. We could chat about those guys before we move into the other 2 buckets, which are the hopeful players, hopeful for a breakout, and then the longer shots.
Yeah, I think these are all 4 interesting candidates and degrees of confidence here for me. I think Tucker Kraft is like borderline cheating to include him for the Packers, but I also don't mind it, 1, because I love Tucker Kraft, and 2, I don't really feel confident projecting any of those receivers to break out next year because of just how muddled that room can be. Colston Loveland, I also think is, I agree, a slam dunk breakout candidate. I think closer to being like the tight end 1 overall next season than the tight end 5 in rankings next season. Scatteraboo and Pearsall are interesting. Do you have any questions about Pearsall's game or like fit, or is it just all a health-based question with him? Because I like Pearsall. I think anybody with a pair of eyeballs can see that when he's healthy, Ricky Pearsall is good. I guess to me, it's just the question of, again, what's the role going to be on the team? What other receivers are added this offseason? And yes, can he stay on the football field?
If you look at what he did this year, like I said, he had the 200-yard games in the first 3 weeks. When he came back to the lineup initially, definitely wasn't himself, right? And we saw that. 5 catches for 20 yards over those next 3 games when he got back in the lineup. But after that, he popped up again, right? 6 for 96 in week 15, 5 for 85 in week 17. I don't know how many fantasy managers had the guts to actually put him in their lineups for the fantasy playoffs, but if he was in your lineup, those were pretty good stats, even though he didn't find the end zone there. And I think the good news coming out of this season, of course, the injuries really unfortunate there, but the good news was he was a top 24 fantasy wideout 4 times in the 6 appearances where he wasn't limited due to injury. I kind of went through like those 3 games that I mentioned. I'm not going to count those because I don't think he was himself in those contests. Yeah. But if you look at those 6 appearances where injuries weren't a factor, top 24 wideout 4 times. I think we've seen it. We've seen these glimpses. This one feels very obvious to me that he is going to emerge with the draft capital behind him in a really good offense. You know, the 49ers had a great schedule this season, but the injuries were just too much to overcome. And I think next year, depending what happens with that electrical station or whatever it is next to their practice field, hopefully we get a little better injury luck from them as a whole. And hopefully we see some of these guys stay out there all season. And I think if that happens, we're going to see Pearsall really emerge as an impact fantasy player.
I like how John Lynch at the press conference today says, yeah, we're looking into that. You got to look into everything. I was like, that sounds like something a politician says when they're definitely not looking into it. Like that's what that sounded like to me in terms of the electrical station. But yeah, I agree with you. I'll try to sprinkle this in as we talk about some of these breakout candidates is just like what to look for this offseason to your degree of confidence. For me, it is what other receivers are added to the room here, because not just target competition wise, but the thing that surprised me about Pearsall this year that I didn't expect was just he ended up playing so much outside X receiver. I think he would be much better and more like predictable in terms of when he's going to have his big weeks and maybe even just a higher floor is when like he's able to move around, play more from the slot, stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, Pearsall himself said he only got 4 starts as himself in 2025. And you mentioned those were 4 good games for him. So I agree with you. I think we have seen it. The Cam Scatterbo conversation is going to be interesting. I agree with you that if he walks into the role that he was in last year, agree, big time breakout, but it is a new coaching staff. He is a day 3 drafted running back. Historically, those are kind of bad bets to make. And that's without looking at the player individually. Just day 3 running back going into a new season with a new coaching staff. Like they could add competition to this room, right? Like Tyron Tracy was that guy. They added competition. Tyron Tracy was dusted by Cam Scatterbo. So just something to watch this offseason. But at least he sounds like he's going to be healthy for the offseason, whereas Malik Neighbors, they had a great quote where they said he's trending towards hopefully being available for training camp, which is kind of a bizarre thing to say. So, yeah, definitely something to watch on Scatterbo, but a good breakout candidate. Let's get to the next category here. This is hopeful. I'll read off the names, and you tell me which one you feel really strongly about here. You've got Emeka Egbuka for the Buccaneers. Not a player I think we need to talk about. We've talked about him a bajillion times. Trey Benson, Arizona Cardinals. Jalen Coker, Carolina Panthers. Could talk all day about Jalen Coker. Jacoby Crosby-Merritt from the Commanders. And Tyler Shuck from the Saints. I thought you hated Tyler Shuck, so this is interesting to me that you have him here as a breakout candidate.
I mean, he's a hopeful breakout candidate. He's not a confident breakout candidate. But yes, the more I've gone back and looked at Tyler Shuck, I've been giving you your props on it.
You've been looking into it. You and John Lynch are looking into it very deeply. Yeah, I got it. Okay.
The more I go over it, I still stand by what I said. I think the ceiling for him at best is still low end QB1. And specifically, we talked about him from a dynasty standpoint. And in dynasty, most of my teams, I'm set at quarterback. I'm not looking for that next quarterback to come up. So I suggested I will be trying to shop him this offseason. I still feel that way. But if you're looking at that Saints roster, I think he's someone that showed us more than enough this season that you can feel like he is comfortable in that offense. He is going to be the week 1 starter next year. Showed a little bit of rushing ability this season as well. So little more of a fantasy ceiling there, even if it's not like a high-end QB1 fantasy season. I think he's more of that borderline, like low-end QB1, high-end QB2. But regardless, he definitely deserves mention, and you deserve all the accolades for calling that one out around midseason or whenever that was.
Just kidding.
I think
Please.
Trey Benson here is one to me that's interesting because it looked like that ascension was going to happen this year. James Conner goes down early. And you figure, all right, everything's lining up here for Trey Benson to be the starting back in an offense where the running back has been successful for fantasy. And then he goes out and gets hurt right away. and he's out for the season, right? He tried to make a comeback. He wasn't able to. So we didn't get to see anything other than those early games when he was mostly sharing the field with James Conner. In those games, though, he was more efficient than James Conner was, right? He had 170 scrimmage yards on 29 touches during those first 3 contests when both of them were healthy. Conner, 133 yards on 40 attempts out there. And isn't this what they planned to do? Like when they drafted Benson, wasn't the idea that he was going to be the heir apparent here to Conner? I think it was, right? So we're looking at Conner also coming back from an injury. He's going to turn 31 years old before the season. I think expecting him to come back and be the same player that he was before this injury at his age, pretty unlikely, even considering the idea that Trey Benson might have been making that move before anyone got hurt this year. And so in my mind, I think this is just a natural progression where they're going to give him this opportunity, former 3rd round pick. He's 7 years younger than James Conner. I think they're going to give him his shot next year, and we'll see if he's able to run with that. A lot of things to be sorted out, of course, in Arizona in terms of coaching staff, scheme, and all that sort of stuff. But right now, I think Trey Benson is someone that I'm pretty interested in trying to go get on the cheap, because I think it's just an injury discount. I think if he had been out there this year, we'd be looking at him in a completely different light. Of course, we talk about Jalen Coker all the time, but just finished the season so strong, right? 12 targets, 9 catches, 134 yards and a touchdown, bunch of career highs in his last game there. Was great to see. I don't think it was that much of a surprise to us at all, but he is a really interesting player. And then JCM, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, what a weird season going from like the hype machine that we had before the year where he could take over this job to the way it kind of went where he got an opportunity, didn't really run away with it. We saw Chris Rodriguez start to get involved. We saw Jerry McNichols have some moments as the third piece in that backfield. And yet at the end of the season, JCM was more the guy. He looked more interesting. He looked more explosive. Chris Rodriguez only topped 70 scrimmage yards twice, never went over 85 yards in a single game this year. JCM went over 70 scrimmage yards 4 times on the year, did it twice in the final month. I think he's the player that you want in this backfield, on top of the fact that Rodriguez and McNichols, they're set to be free agents. So right now, JCM looks like he should have an opportunity depending who else they bring in. But fantasy-wise, I'd be looking at trying to make a move to get him in Dynasty as well.
Yeah, really interesting player. By the way, we're showing his stats on the screen right now. I would never have guessed that he had 800 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns. I know that's not like a ton of rushing yards in a 17-game schedule, but still, there were just so many times he was completely uninvolved or like the third back with Chris Rodriguez holding it down. Yeah, he is definitely an interesting one because I think there's a chance that they kind of run in with another committee-based backfield where he's the lead back of that committee this offseason. They internally promoted at offensive coordinator. They just removed Cliff Kingsbury and they promoted David Blau. Remember, he started a game for the Lions as a quarterback. He actually played games for the Cardinals, I believe. He was on the roster there. But he was kind of the quarterback coach, and now he is the offensive coordinator now for this team. So that could lead to some system familiarity here. I don't know. It's just so weird. That'll be an interesting one to talk about as we go through the offseason. But I do think the Commanders are also a candidate to potentially take a big swing at running back. So that's something to watch this offseason. And I guess the same would apply to Trey Benson as well. But same front office that drafted Trey Benson is remaining in Arizona. It's just a question of what the coaching staff looks like, because I don't think James Conner is going to be on this roster here this upcoming season. But yeah, both of these guys, like a Jeremiah Love type of player in the NFL draft, you got to watch out for a big swing there. Probably not for the Cardinals in the top 5 picks or whatever, but the Commanders potentially later on in the top 10 there. But let's get into the longer shots here because we got 4 interesting names on this one.
Yeah, Terrence Ferguson, the young tight end for the Rams. Torrey Horton, who kind of had his season stolen by injury. It was a very weird one. He got hurt. We didn't see him again. But before that, he had carved out a role in that offense already. I think he's a really exciting player to look to. Jaden Blue, who we joke about all the time with our resident Cowboys fan, producer Colin. We'll see. I mean, it took until week 18 for him to really do much, and it wasn't even that big of a game, but you go into next season, we'll see what the Cowboys decide to do, if they want to go cheap again at running back, if they bring back Javonte Williams, which they suggested that they at least want to do. That'll have a big impact, obviously, on Jaden Blue having a role where we could call him a fantasy breakout next season. Seems more likely that he's still a backup on that team, which is why he's a longer shot. And then Isaac Tesla on the Lions. I mean, this guy, incredibly efficient, all the touchdowns despite just 16 receptions on the season. But the team invested quite a bit to get him, right? They invested 3 third-round picks to make that trade, to make the move to get him. I think the only thing that's holding him back, I think we'd be much more excited about him if it wasn't for the fact that this team has a lot of players in that offense, and it's going to be difficult for him to see a big enough target share where we can feel good about him for fantasy. So it probably would require an injury where we see one of their other receivers go down, and then he gets more of an opportunity in year 2. But you can't deny he was good. He was very good in the role that he had this year, and he earned a bigger role as the season went along there.
Yeah, I think for the Lions with Tesla and then Cowboys with Jaden Blue, it's just those are teams that are tough to pick a breakout player for because they're veteran teams with established starters. You would need some level of shakeup there. Potentially for Jaden Blue, it would be Javonte Williams moving on. Man, Torrey Horton, God, I really hope that they saw enough from him to walk into next season feeling good about him because Shaheed is a free agent. I wonder if Cooper Kupp becomes a cap casualty for them. I think they actually have a good amount of cap space next year due to the Seahawks, but obviously not sure you're paying Cooper Kupp's salary for his level of contributions at this point. Did they see enough from Horton to make him the wide receiver 2 next year? Because I love Torrey Horton as a talent, but he fell in the draft due to injuries, and then he got hurt in his rookie year. You wonder if he becomes one of those what could have been type of players. Thoughts on Horton at all? Because he's somebody.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely saw enough. Like I was saying, to give him the role that he had even at the beginning of the season as a 5th-round pick. He was playing around 48% of the snaps before he had those injuries. Had 5 touchdowns in his first 8 games. Had 2 top 10 weekly fantasy finishes. We were seeing it. That's the start of a guy potentially breaking out, and the injury just totally stopped that. I think Ferguson's interesting as well because depending what they decide to do in that Rams tight end room, if we see some of those guys leave, which, Tyler Higbee, he was hurt this year. He's getting a little deeper into his career. In the 5 games where we saw Ferguson have at least 3 targets, which is not that much, just 3 targets at least, he posted 50 yards and or a touchdown 4 times in those 5 games. And he wasn't getting huge volume. So that's a sign to me that obviously Sean McVay knows what he has there. That's a young tight end who's finding a way to contribute, even though he's in a crowded tight end room. And there's 2 great receivers who are commanding a lot of volume as well in that offense. So he is very interesting and someone that, we know there's so many guys in this rookie class that came out this past year that are going to be sophomores next year who are going to be fantastic tight ends. And I think Ferguson's someone that might fly under the radar compared to some of the other guys because they had much bigger seasons. And yet it would not surprise me if we see him come on and become a fantasy relevant player as a top 15, or maybe even get himself into that low end tight end 1 range next year. I think that's within his range of outcomes.
Yeah, Ferguson's a guy of any of these longer shots that I might have argued should be in the hopeful category just because I know they really like him there in Los Angeles. I think he's an exciting player. He flashed this year, and they did so many interesting things with tight ends, especially him specifically was a guy they would split him out as a true outside receiver when Devontae Adams was hurt. They used him to lift the lid and to clear out space for some of their 13 personnel stuff. So if he can just develop more as a receiver, because there were definitely times where him and Stafford weren't on the same page. There were communication errors, or he just didn't quite know how to finish the play. But tight end's a slow developing Polaroid type of picture, to use a Scott Pianowski term. So I like Ferguson. He's definitely somebody that I think could become a more of that hopeful category breakout player.